it can look familiar from a distance. Castles, cathedrals, countryside lanes, a capital that keeps showing up in the world's imagination. But when you travel it as a single line, south to north, it stops feeling like a postcard and starts reading like a timeline. A country where power grew beside a river, faith organized the road, mystery was set in stone, and the land itself keeps peeling back older chapters the further you go. Welcome to Era Trails. And if you enjoy documentaries that blend beauty with meaning, stories that explore not just what a place looks like, but why it became what it is, take a second to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps the channel grow, and it keeps you with us for the journeys ahead. In this episode, we're crossing England from the gravity of London on the Thames into Canterbury's pilgrimage corridors, out onto the chalk downs where Stonehenge and Avebury still hold their silence. We'll follow the coast where cliffs turn into a visible calendar, 185 million years of Earth history, stacked and exposed along the Jurassic Coast. We'll step into Bath, where heat rises from the ground and the Romans built a city around it, then move into the iron and smoke heart of the Industrial Revolution at Ironbridge, where a gorge became a blueprint for the modern world. From there, the land turns starker. The Peak District tightens into limestone dales and gritstone edges. The Lake District opens into ice-carved valleys and dark water that looks like it remembers glaciers. And at the end of the line, we meet a hard idea made physical: Hadrian's Wall, Rome's northern boundary, stretched across the island like a sentence that still refuses to fade. This is Wonders of England, told as a journey through layers. River, road, stone, cliff, steam, and frontier. Let's take the trail. We start in London, where England's story doesn't just happen, it gets organized. The city sits on the bend of the River Thames, a working artery that's been moving people, power, money, and ideas for centuries. From above, the river looks calm. Up close, you can feel the tide in it. This isn't a decorative ribbon. It's a tidal river, and London grew by learning how to live with water that insists on coming back. The ground under the skyline is part of the plot. Much of this city rests on London clay and old Thames gravels, soft, workable layers that shaped where early settlements could hold, where foundations could bite, and where the river could be bridged, widened, controlled. The Thames floodplain made trade easy and floods inevitable, so London became a place defined by engineering as much as ambition. That's the quiet genius of it. The city's natural wonder is a river system, and the human wonder is the way people refuse to be limited by it. Follow the river west to east, and you hit the symbols that still set the tone. Westminster, with Westminster Abbey and the Houses of Parliament, is authority-made architecture, stone that tells you who gets to decide. Then there's the Tower of London, where the city's confidence shows its teeth. Fortress, prison, treasury, legend. Across the water and through the streets, you'll catch the vertical brag of St. Paul's Cathedral and the long cinematic sweep of the Thames itself, bridges stacking eras on top of each other like pages you can walk across. But London is also alive in the margins. Along the embankments and parks, you'll see London plane trees holding their ground against soot in seasons. On the water, mute swans and gray herons work the shallows, looking completely unbothered by glass towers. In the early hours, red foxes slip through quiet streets like they own the place, because in a way, they do. And if you look up near the big structures, peregrine falcons sometimes haunt the heights, turning the city into a hunting ground made of ledges and wind. To experience London in true era trail style, keep it tight and river-led. Start at Westminster Bridge at first light, when the Thames is steel-colored and the city hasn't fully switched on. Walk the South Bank, let the skyline unfold like a timeline, then cross to the Tower Bridge and circle the Tower of London, where the river narrows and history feels heavy. If you want the modern counterpoint, track east toward the Thames Barrier, the city's blunt reminder that the river is powerful enough to demand a movable wall. For grounding, base yourself near the Thames so the river stays your compass. London is loud, dense, and expensive, but the payoff is that every hour offers a different face. Ceremonial Westminster, fortified Tower Country, the working river, the living parks, the hidden wildlife. And this is why London matters in our documentary. If this trail is about layers, river, road, stone, cliff, steam, frontier, London is the river chapter where the whole machine starts. It's the place where geography becomes governance, where a tidal river turns into an empire's bloodstream, and where England becomes something you can see, touch, and follow. Next, we leave the capital's gravity and step into a different kind of power. Canterbury, where England's story is carried not by water, but by footsteps, along roads worn down by faith. We leave London's tidal muscle and head into Kent, where the landscape tightens, the roads start feeling older, and the story shifts from power to belief. Canterbury sits on the River Great Stour, tucked just south of the North Downs, a chalk backbone that quietly shapes this whole corner of England. Chalk matters here. It holds water, releases it slowly, and feeds the kinds of spring-fed systems that built towns before towns were cities. You can feel that logic in the way Canterbury is arranged, a settled place, anchored by water, surrounded by rolling downland, built to last. And then the skyline makes its claim. Canterbury Cathedral doesn't rise like a tourist attraction, it rises like a headquarters. This is the seat of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and for centuries it has been a gravitational point for English Christianity and English politics. The cathedral precincts are a whole world. Walls, gates, courtyards, cloisters, and that sense of stepping through a seam in time. Architecturally, it's a layered body. Norman mass meeting later Gothic ambition, built, burned, rebuilt, and expanded because the story demanded more space. Even the details carry receipts. Exceptional early stained glass, the kind you don't just look at, you read like illuminated history. The pivot point, the moment that turns Canterbury from important into magnetic, is murder. On 29th December 1170, Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, was killed inside his own cathedral after a long conflict with King Henry II. The shockwave wasn't abstract. It turned into footsteps. Becket's death and the cult of his sainthood made Canterbury Cathedral one of Europe's great pilgrimage destinations, the kind of place people crossed countries to reach, chasing healing, forgiveness, meaning, whatever word they could live with. This is the engine behind the famous idea of the road to Canterbury, not a metaphor first, but a real and crowded route of human motion. To experience Canterbury properly, don't treat it like one building. Start with the trio that defines the city's deeper identity: Canterbury Cathedral, St. Augustine's Abbey, and St. Martin's Church, a linked sacred landscape recognized together as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Walk it as a sequence. Enter the cathedral and stand in the northwest transept, where the martyrdom still feels like a scar the building refuses to smooth over. Move east into the Trinity Chapel, where Becket's shrine once drew a tide of pilgrims before it was destroyed in the Reformation. Then step out into the ruins of St. Augustine's Abbey, where the story reaches back into early English Christianity, and finish at St. Martin's Church, a quieter, older anchor that makes the whole thing feel less like legend and more like continuity. Outside the stone, life keeps running. Along the River Stour and the green pockets threaded through the city, you'll catch gray herons posted like sentries and moorhens stitching across the water. In warmer months, swifts and other city birds cut fast arcs around the cathedral's height, turning holy architecture into wind-swept habitat. And beyond the walls, the chalk country can flip the mood in minutes. Open skies over downland, hedgerows, fields, and that clean edge-of-town feeling you only get in England when countryside presses close. For grounding, Canterbury is compact and walkable, which is exactly why it works as our second stop. Base yourself near the cathedral precincts so you can do it early or late, when the streets quiet down and the place stops feeling like an itinerary. Give it time in the morning. Cathedrals are different before the day crowds arrive. More echo, more weight, more presence. And this is why Canterbury matters in our documentary. London is governance built on a river. Canterbury is belief built on a road. It's where England's story becomes something people physically travel toward, where architecture, power, and conscience collide hard enough to change the map of culture for centuries. Next, we leave the city and step into England's older silence, out onto the chalk downs where Stonehenge and Avebury sit in the open air, still refusing to explain themselves. We leave Canterbury and push west into Wiltshire, where England's surface beauty gives way to something older and less explainable. This is Stonehenge and Avebury, two cores of the same sacred landscape, protected together as the Stonehenge, Avebury, and associated sites UNESCO World Heritage Property. They're separated by roughly 15 miles, but they read like one system: monuments, earthworks, avenues, burial mounds, an engineered memory spread across chalk country. The stage matters. Stonehenge sits on Salisbury Plain, a wide, wind-exposed upland built on chalk, a porous bedrock that drains fast, keeps the ground firm, and makes big open skies feel even bigger. In this kind of terrain, a monument doesn't get swallowed by trees or hills. It dominates the horizon by design, and it stays visible across distance like a signal. And then you're in front of the thing itself, an outer ring of towering sarsen stones, many averaging around 25 tons, locked together with horizontal lintels using mortise and tenon joints that feel almost shockingly carpentered for deep prehistory. Inside that heavyweight architecture sits the smaller stonework, the bluestones, geologically varied and hauled from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales, each typically 2 to 5 tons. That detail changes the emotional temperature. This wasn't use what's nearby. This was commitment, movement, logistics, intention. The alignment is part of the spell. Stonehenge is oriented to the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset, tying the structure to the sky in a way that's still being argued over, measured, remeasured, and debated. And it's not alone out here. The surrounding landscape is dense with prehistory, earthworks, ceremonial routes like the Stonehenge Avenue, and clusters of burial mounds, all reinforcing that this was never just a circle of stones. It was a whole ritual geography. Then you drive north into the North Wessex Downs edge, and the mood flips from iconic to immersive. Avebury isn't roped off from life. It contains life. The Avebury Henge is a vast ring of human-made earth, a bank and ditch that nearly wraps a full mile around, with the ditch originally about 9 meters deep. It was dug using stone and bone tools, and the excavated chalk was piled into banks that would have looked bright and freshly white when new, an artificial ridge of glare in green countryside. Inside that earthwork sits the largest prehistoric stone circle in the world, and within that, the remnants of 2 smaller inner circles, like nested chapters of the same belief. This is where the wider constellation starts to show. The UNESCO listing isn't just a stamp for Stonehenge and Avebury. It's for the surrounding associated sites, because the wonder is the density. A short run from Avebury brings you to West Kennet Long Barrow, a long, ancient burial mound with a stone chamber that still feels like a throat of earth. Then there's Silbury Hill, a massive artificial mound, pure human shaping of terrain, sitting in open view, like a question mark you can't answer. Together, these sites make the landscape feel authored, not accidental. Even the ecology fits the setting. Chalk grassland thrives on thin, well-drained soils over chalk, and in spring and summer it can turn subtly vivid. Wildflowers and chalk-loving plants tucked into the short turf, including pyramidal orchids, and in the wider downland region, species like the early gentian. Over that open ground, you'll often hear skylarks before you spot them, and you may catch brown hares in the fields at the edges, fast, alert, built for wide horizons. To experience this chapter properly, treat it as two different kinds of awe. Do Stonehenge first, early if you can, when the light is low and the stones throw long shadows that make the geometry obvious. Walk the wider setting. Don't just stare at the ring, because the surrounding earthworks are part of what makes the monument feel purposeful, not decorative. Then shift to Avebury and walk the henge itself. Follow the line of the bank, trace the ditch, move between standing stones at ground level, and let the scale reveal itself slowly. If you add just 2 satellites, make them West Kennet Long Barrow and Silbury Hill, one for intimacy, one for brute, improbable mass. For grounding, this is open country with real weather. Wind and rain change everything out here. Visibility, mood, even how ancient it feels. So build in time for the landscape to have its say, not just the monuments. And this is why Stonehenge and Avebury matter in our documentary. Canterbury was England's faith turned into roads and architecture. This is faith before Scripture, belief expressed through chalk, earthworks, and stones heavy enough to outlast languages. It's England at the point where history runs out and deep time starts doing the talking. Next, we trade ritual landscapes for a different kind of archive, one written in cliff faces and fossils on the Jurassic Coast. From the ritual silence of Stonehenge and Avebury, we drop south into a coastline that does something rarer than beauty. It shows you time, layer by layer, without asking you to imagine it. This is the Jurassic Coast, officially the Dorset and East Devon coast, a UNESCO World Heritage Site stretched along roughly 155 kilometers of the English Channel shoreline. The designation isn't for scenery alone. It's for a near-continuous, erosion-exposed rock record that spans about 185 million years, running through the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous, with fossil localities important enough to anchor global geology and paleontology. Start in the west, near Exmouth in East Devon, and the story opens in red. Around Orcombe Rocks and the Devon end of the site, you meet older, warmer world materials, Triassic beds that speak of desert-like conditions and shifting environments long before this coast looked anything like England. Move east, and the cliffs begin to stack into a clearer sequence, darker Jurassic units, then younger pale Cretaceous layers, each step along the path turning the coastline into a literal walk across geologic time. That's the core mechanism here. Coastal erosion keeps slicing fresh faces into the cliffs, and every storm is a blunt little editor, cutting new pages into view. The Jurassic section is where the coast earns its name and its obsession. Around Lyme Regis and Charmouth, the cliffs are famous for being unstable in the best possible way, prone to slips and collapses that keep exposing fossil-rich layers. These are the kinds of rocks that preserve ancient seas, shells, hard parts, whole creatures when you're lucky. Along these beaches, it's normal to find ammonites and belemnites after weather does its work, and this stretch is part of why England's fossil story became world famous. This is also where the human story locks onto the geology. Lyme Regis is inseparable from Mary Anning, the early 19th century fossil collector whose finds helped force scientific thinking to change. The Lyme Regis Museum credits her with landmark discoveries, including an early complete ichthyosaur, a complete plesiosaur skeleton, and other sea dragon-era shocks that made prehistory feel real to the wider world. On the Jurassic Coast, the past isn't just old. It's documented, catalogued, argued over, and still occasionally revealed by a fresh fall of cliff. As you keep moving east into Dorset, the coastline begins showing off landforms that are basically geology made cinematic. Durdledore is the obvious crowd puller, a natural limestone arch bitten out by wave energy along lines of weakness, proof that even solid rock is just rock on a timer. But the deeper lesson lands at Lulworth Cove because it demonstrates structure, resistance, and process in one clean view. Here, the coast is concordant. Harder bands of Portland limestone and Purbeck beds run parallel to the shore, acting like a gate. Once the sea breaks through that gate, it chews into softer layers behind. Wealden clay, green sand, and other less resistant materials, widening the cove into a near-perfect bowl until it meets the tougher chalk at the back. Stairhole nearby reads like the early draft version of the same process. Then you hit one of the coast's most dramatic pieces of engineering by nature, Chesil Beach. This isn't a normal beach. It's a massive shingle barrier, about 29 kilometers long, piled into a wall that in places rises high above the land behind it. Sheltered behind that barrier sits the Fleet, a long, shallow lagoon that turns the whole scene into a two-part system: violent open sea on one side, quiet, brackish water on the other. This is geomorphology you can understand at a glance. Sediment transport, wave sorting, barrier formation, scaled up to something that feels absurdly intentional. By the time you reach the eastern end, toward Studland Bay and Old Harry Rocks on the Isle of Purbeck, the palette brightens into younger Cretaceous chalk. Old Harry Rocks are chalk stacks and stumps, sculpted into isolated forms by wave attack and collapse, marking the far end of the Jurassic Coast like punctuation in white stone. That eastward shift from red and dark beds to pale chalk drives home the real point. This coastline isn't one look, it's a sequence of worlds. Life clings to these cliffs and headlands in ways that make the place feel even more animated. Along the Purbeck Cliffs, Breeding seabirds include fulmars, kittiwakes, guillemots, and razorbills. Small populations, but enough to turn ledges into living noise when the season is right. In the coves and rock pools, you'll catch the smaller drama. Seaweed-fringed shallows, things moving underwater you can't quite name. The sense that the edge of land is always busy. To experience the Jurassic Coast in Eritreal style, treat it as a curated timeline with a few proof points. Start west at Exmouth or Seaton to see the older end of the story. Then move to Lyme Regis and Charmouth for the fossil chapter, ideally after rough weather, when fresh material is most likely to be exposed. Step east for the landform trilogy, Durdle Door, Lulworth Cove, and Chesil Beach, each one a different lesson in how rock type, structure, and wave energy translate into shape. If you want one high vantage that makes the entire coast feel legible, climb Golden Cap, the highest point on the Jurassic Coast at 191 meters, where you can read the coastline as a continuous line instead of separate spots. For grounding, this is an active coastline. Cliffs fail, paths close, beaches change with tide and storm. Respect signage, respect tide times, and don't treat fossil hunting like a hobby you improvise under unstable slopes. The coast rewards patience, and it punishes shortcuts. And this is why the Jurassic Coast matters in our documentary. Stonehenge and Avebury were human belief written into chalk and earthworks. This is the deeper archive beneath that, Earth history exposed in public, showing how climates, seas, and life itself change through vast spans of time, including the kinds of upheavals that reshape everything. England doesn't just have history. Here it has deep time out in the open. Next, we step away from cliffs and fossils and into a city built around heat rising from the ground. Bath, where hot springs turn geology into ritual and later into elegance. We leave the fossil timeline of the Jurassic Coast and step inland to a city built around a geological anomaly that England almost never gets. This is Bath, sitting in the valley of the River Avon, and the reason it exists isn't empire or trade or even a good defensive hill, it's heat. Real geothermal heat rising out of the ground in the middle of a city. The mechanics are surprisingly legible once you know what you're looking at. Rain falls on the Mendip Hills to the south and sinks into Carboniferous limestone, feeding a deep limestone aquifer. The water moves underground, drops to roughly 2.5 kilometer depth, warms, and then rises back up under pressure along fractures and faults, most famously the Pennyquick Fault, until it resurfaces as thermal springs in the city center. Those springs aren't symbolic, they're volumetric. Bath has 3 primary hot springs, King Spring, Hetling Spring, and Cross Bath Spring, and together they discharge around 1.25 million liters per day. At the surface, the waters commonly arrive around 45 degrees, hot enough to steam in cool air and warm enough to make a city famous for 2,000 years straight. That's why the Romans built Aquae Sulis here. The site wasn't just a bathhouse, it was a sacred spring, paired with a temple complex, with the local Celtic deity Sulis fused into Sulis Minerva under Roman religious logic. The centerpiece is the Roman Baths complex, where the Great Bath sits like an open-air chamber of green water and stone, still fed by the same spring system, still anchored to the same geological vent in the ground. But Bath is a rare double story. Geology makes the spring, Rome makes the myth, and then the Georgian city arrives and turns taking the waters into an entire social machine. The city of Bath is a UNESCO World Heritage Site because the layers still read cleanly. Authentic hot springs at the center, major Roman remains preserved, and an unusually intact city of 18th century planning and architecture still lived in and still functioning. That honey-colored look you associate with Bath isn't paint, it's rock. Most of the city's signature buildings are faced in Bath stone, an oolitic limestone from the Great Oolite Group, Middle Jurassic material laid down in a shallow sea, later mined from places like Combe Down and Bathampton Down. It's a freestone, meaning masons can cut it in any direction, which is exactly why Bath could be shaped into such precise curves and long classical lines. This is where the city becomes pure geometry. Walk up to the Royal Crescent, and you're looking at a single architectural gesture held across an entire hillside, built 1760-1774. A civic flex made of limestone and proportion. Nearby, the circus tightens the same idea into a ring, turning town planning into theater. Drop back down toward the River Avon, and you hit Pulteney Bridge, designed by Robert Adam, famous because it's one of the rare bridges with shops built across its full span on both sides, stone commerce stitched over running water. And the water keeps asserting itself. Stand by Pulteney Weir, and the Avon turns into white noise and motion, one of those places where you can feel how a river shapes a city's soundscape. Follow the banks, and you'll get the softer layer, riverside trees like willow, and the wildlife that thrives where urban water stays productive. Kingfishers, gray herons, water voles, even otters along the wider Avon catchment if you're lucky, plus clouds of dragonflies in summer. For a clean era trails run through Bath, do it in 3 passes. Start at the source. Go straight to the Roman baths and look for the spring itself, because once you see the water rising, everything else in the city makes sense. Then step into the vertical. Walk into Bath Abbey and look up. Its fan vaulting turns stone into something that feels almost weightless, a visual counterpoint to the heavy Roman engineering below. Finally, read the Georgian city as a designed landscape, Royal Crescent to the circus, down through the core to Pulteney Bridge, ending at the Avon, where the whole place exhales. If you want the modern continuation of the ancient ritual, Thermi Bath Spa keeps the hot water city idea alive with contemporary pools fed by the same thermal identity that made Aquae Sulis inevitable. And this is why Bath matters in our documentary. After the Jurassic Coast, where time is exposed in cliffs, Bath is time harnessed, geothermal water turned into religion, into medicine, into leisure, into architecture. It's England proving it can build an entire world, around a single natural feature and make that feature feel present in every street. Next, we leave the warm, curated elegance of Bath and move toward a harsher engine of change, Ironbridge Gorge, where coal, iron, and a river valley helped light the fuse of the Industrial Revolution. From the warm ritual of Bath, we move into a valley where the heat came from a different source, fire fed by coal and furnaces that changed the planet's future. This is Ironbridge Gorge, a steep-sided cut of the River Severn through Shropshire, a place where landscape and raw materials lined up so perfectly that the Industrial Revolution stopped being an idea and became infrastructure. The gorge itself is part of the wonder. It wasn't carved by gentle river patience alone. The Severn Gorge was shaped by Ice Age processes, meltwater and overflow cutting hard into the terrain at the end of the last glaciation, leaving a deep valley that exposed strata like a quarry made by nature. That incision mattered because it laid bare the full industrial recipe in one tight corridor. Seams of coal, beds of iron ore, layers of limestone, and workable clays like fire clay, all close enough to each other to be mined and moved without heroic logistics. Geologically, this is a boundary country. Parts of the wider area sit on older Silurian marine sediments, mudstones, siltstones, sandstones, and limestones, while much of the industrial heart is tied to Carboniferous rocks, including the coal measures, dominated by mudstones and sandstones with economically vital coal seams. In other words, the valley doesn't just look dramatic, it reveals the materials that made it historically inevitable. Then comes the human pivot, the moment the gorge becomes the world. At Coalbrookdale, iron-making took a leap that sounds technical, but rewired history. Abraham Darby. I pioneered smelting iron with coke instead of charcoal in 1709, a shift that unlocked scale and consistency at exactly the time Britain was ready to build everything out of iron. The blast furnace remains at Coalbrookdale, and the site is treated as a foundational artifact of industrial change. And the valley's signature symbol is the simplest proof that this new material era had arrived. The Iron Bridge, a cast iron arch spanning the River Severn. It was built in 1779 and opened to traffic in 1781 from designs by Thomas Farnolles Pritchard and built by Abraham Darby III. It wasn't just a crossing, it was a public declaration that iron could replace stone and timber at monumental scale. UNESCO describes it plainly as the first known major metal bridge, and that's why it reads like a global turning point in a single frame. The setting amplifies it. Stand on the banks, and you'll notice how the bridge's ribs echo the curve of the gorge, how the river sits low and slow beneath it, how the wooded sides make the engineering feel almost improbably delicate for something that once screamed future. The River Severn also explains why this valley industrialized so hard: water transport. A navigable river running toward the Bristol Channel meant heavy goods could actually move, ore in, iron out, without the entire system choking on its own weight. Even now, the gorge is full of chapters you can walk into. The Coalbrookdale Museum of Iron is the cleanest way to understand the material itself, how iron shifted from tools to objects to art castings, and how quickly industry became culture. Nearby, Blist's Hill Victorian town throws you forward into the lived consequences, a working settlement shaped by extraction and manufacturing, where the Industrial Revolution stops being a timeline and becomes daily life. The valley's ecology is the counterweight. Along the River Severn, you'll find the classic riparian mix, trees like willow and alder near the waterline, and wildlife that uses the river as a corridor. Kingfishers, gray herons, swans, and, when you're lucky, otters moving like ghosts at the edges. In warm months, dragonflies and damselflies turn the slow water into a flickering layer of motion. It's a reminder that even here, nature never stopped. It just got overbuilt and kept going. To experience Ironbridge Gorge in Eritreal style, keep it structured. Start with the icon, walk the span of the Iron Bridge, then drop down to the riverbank and look back up at the arch so you can feel the scale and the audacity. Then go to the source code of the whole story at Coalbrookdale, the furnaces, the museum, the sense of iron as the material that didn't just build machines, but built a mindset. Finish with the human aftermath at Blist's Hill, because it's one thing to admire innovation and another to understand what it did to work, class, air, and time. For grounding, this is a steep valley with a lot of vertical walking, switchbacks, slopes, stairs, so pace it like a hike, not a town stop. Base yourself around Ironbridge Village so you can move on foot and return to the river between sites. And this is why Ironbridge Gorge matters in our documentary. Bath showed geology becoming ritual and elegance. Heat turned into a city. Ironbridge shows geology becoming industry. Rock layers turned into iron, and iron turned into the modern world. This is one of the places where England's story stops being local and becomes global. Next, we trade furnaces and cast iron for a harsher kind of terrain into the Peak District, where limestone and gritstone pull the landscape back toward raw edge and open sky. From Ironbridge Gorge, we climb into the country that taught England how to be wild again, at least on foot. This is the Peak District National Park, the first place in the UK to be designated a national park in 1951, born out of a long argument about access, land, and who gets to walk the high ground. The wonder here is that the landscape has a built-in split personality, and you can cross the seam in a single day. The south and center are the White Peak, a carboniferous limestone plateau where rock dissolves, water vanishes underground, and valleys get carved into green dales. The north and east are the Dark Peak, a high moorland mass of sandstones and millstone grit, where the land broadens into peat, heather, and wind. Even the names are geology in plain English. Pale limestone country versus darker gritstone uplands. In the White Peak, the ground behaves like a sponge and a maze. Limestone is soluble, so rain and streams don't just carve channels, They widen joints and bedding planes, building karst systems, caves, shafts, sinkholes, and underground rivers. That's why places like Dovedale feel so sculpted. The river Dove threads between limestone walls, creating tight gorges and stepping stone crossings that look designed but are just water exploiting weakness in rock over time. And it's why the area around Castleton is riddled with famous caverns. Peak Cavern, Speedwell Cavern, and Blue John Cavern, where the landscape continues below your boots as much as it does above them. Then you hit the hinge of the park, where the limestone gives way to gritstone and shales, and the scenery turns sharp. The classic proof point is the Hope Valley skyline, Mam Tor, the Great Ridge, and the cleft of Winnet's Pass near Castleton. Mam Tor, the Shivering Mountain, is famous not just for views, but for instability, a large active landslide system with textbook features that geologists use as a case study. The slope fails because weaker layers, especially shales, deform and creep, and that movement famously destroyed the old road beneath it, leaving the broken tarmac as a permanent scar you can walk. On the dark peak side, the geology changes the mood. Millstone grit forms escarpments, long, hard edges where the land drops away in steps. That's where you get England's most iconic cliff lines: Stanage Edge, Burbage Edge, Kerbar Edge, gritstone ramparts that catch weather like a sail and give you those huge, cinematic horizons. Underfoot, the high ground turns into blanket bog and moor, where peat builds slowly and the land holds water like a memory. The ecology follows the rock. Moorland here is dominated by plants built for thin soils, acidity, and exposure: heather, cottongrass, bilberry, and other upland specialists. It looks empty until you learn how to read it: cottongrass heads nodding in wet hollows, bilberry low and tough, heather forming the purple skin of late summer. Over that open ground, birds become the punctuation. Species like curlew, ring-ouzel, red grouse, and birds of prey, including peregrine falcons in the wider moorland crag country. To experience the Peak District in Era Trail style, treat it as a two-part landscape you can physically stitch together. Start in the seam country, base yourself around Castleton, and do the Mam Tor, Great Ridge Walk, where you can literally stand on the border between limestone and gritstone worlds. Drop into Winnet's Pass to see the limestone gorge up close, then go underground at Speedwell Cavern or Peak Cavern to feel what karst really means in a place like this: land that keeps going below the surface. Then move to the edges. Pick one gritstone escarpment, Stanage Edge is the classic, and walk it in changing light. The geometry of millstone grit looks completely different in sun, cloud, and fog, and the whole point of the dark peak is how fast weather can rewrite the scene. If you want the White Peak version of beauty, less brutal, more carved, do Dovedale and then widen the view through limestone valleys like Monsall Dale on the River Wye side of the park's Dale country. This is where England feels ancient in a softer way: dry stone walls, green folds, pale rock showing through grass, rivers doing long, slow work. For grounding, the Peak District looks gentle on camera and can still be serious terrain. Moorland paths can turn into bog, visibility can drop fast, and edges are real cliffs. Plan your loops, respect the weather, and don't assume national park means tame. And this is why the Peak District matters in our documentary. Ironbridge Gorge was England turning rock into industry. The Peak District is England turning rock into identity. This is where geology becomes a way of living. Dales and caves beneath Carboniferous limestone and hard horizons on millstone grit, tied together by the idea that open land should be walkable, not locked away. Next, we head further north into a different kind of grandeur, into the Lake District, where glaciers did the heavy carving and the mountains hold water like mirrors. From the Peak District, we push further north into Cumbria, where England stops pretending it's only gentle countryside. The Lake District rises as a compact mountain core, steep fells, deep valleys, and water everywhere, built on ancient rock and then brutally refined by Ice Age glaciers until the whole region feels carved instead of grown. The bones here are old and varied, and the park's shape follows them. Broadly, you're looking at three main geological zones: the darker, older Skiddaw Group rocks in the north, the hard central spine of the Borrowdale Volcanic Group, and younger sedimentary sequences to the south, often grouped under the Windermere Supergroup. The simple rule is the one that always wins. The toughest rocks hold the highest ground. In the Lake District, that toughness lives in the Borrowdale volcanics, ancient lavas and volcanic ash deposits formed around 450 million years ago, now standing up as ridges, crags, and the park's sharpest silhouettes. That's why so many iconic fells cluster in that volcanic heart. Scafell Pike, England's highest summit at 978 meters, sits in this core, along with a skyline of ridges and peaks that look almost too steep to be England. Beneath that visible architecture is deeper plumbing, large igneous intrusions often associated with the Lake District batholith, the buried engine room of magma that later erosion and uplift have slowly exposed. Then the ice does the sculpting that makes the lakes feel inevitable. Glaciers radiated out from the central massif, widening and steepening valleys into classic U-shaped troughs, over-deepening basins, and leaving behind hollowed corridors that filled with water when the ice retreated. This is why the lakes are long and narrow, and why the valley walls rise so abruptly. The landscape is an aftermath of ice thickness and grinding pressure. The water statistics aren't trivia here, they're geography you can feel. Windermere stretches roughly 17 kilometers, making it England's longest lake, while wastewater drops to about 74 meters, the deepest, dark, steep-sided, and framed by fells that make it feel more like a fjord fragment than a typical English lake. And there's a naming quirk that fits the region's stubborn personality. Bassenthwaite Lake is the only body of water in the park that officially uses the word lake in its name. Most others are waters and mearos. Life in the Lake District is built around dampness and old woodland texture. Valleys like Borrowdale carry remnants of Atlantic oak wood, a kind of temperate rainforest atmosphere where trunks and boulders wear thick growths of mosses, liverworts, ferns, and lichens. In the wilder pockets, you can still find red squirrels holding on in strong woodland blocks, and in the skies over the north, ospreys have returned to breed around Bassenthwaite Lake, turning the park's wild reputation into something living rather than nostalgic. To experience the Lake District in Era Trail style, don't try to cover it. Pick contrasts, water, valley, ridge, and let the landscape do the talking. Start from Keswick and work around Derwent Water into Borrowdale, where the valley tightens and the geology stops being abstract. Cross Honister Pass and read the valley shape as evidence, broad floor, steep sides, the signature curve of glacial carving. For high drama, step into the Helvellyn Range, Striding Edge, Swirl Edge, and Red Tarn, sitting in a glacial hollow like a dark eye. For grounding, this is mountain weather in miniature. Fast changes, low cloud, slick rock, and ridgelines that go from scenic to serious without warning. Treat it like real terrain, not nice countryside with lakes. And this is why the Lake District matters in our documentary. After the Peak District taught us England's split geology, limestone below, gritstone above, the lakes are the next escalation. Volcanic backbone plus glacial carving, with water holding the shape of the ice that made it. It's England at its most rugged, condensed into one tight region. Next, we keep moving north to the hard edge of empire, Hadrian's Wall, where stone and border logic cut across the island like a line that still refuses to vanish. From the carved lakes and volcanic backbone of the Lake District, our trail reaches its final line, one that was never meant to be scenic. It was meant to be final. This is Hadrian's Wall, Rome's hard northern statement, built beginning in AD 122 under Emperor Hadrian, stretching coast to coast across what is now northern England, from Wallsend on the River Tyne to Bowness-on-Solway on the Solway Firth. English heritage puts it plainly, about 73 miles long, built to mark and protect the northwest frontier of the Roman Empire. But the wall isn't just a line, it's a system, layered like a military thought process made physical. Along the curtain wall ran a repeating rhythm of small strong points, mile castles and turrets, with larger forts anchoring the whole chain. Gates weren't only for soldiers, they were choke points, checkpoints, places where movement could be controlled and taxed. Even the ground behind the wall was engineered, the vallum, a massive earthwork running to the south, marking a controlled military zone rather than a simple backup ditch. Geology is what turns this from ancient ruin into wonder. The most cinematic central stretches of the wall run along the Great Wind Sill, a thick intrusion of dolerite that's far more resistant than the surrounding sedimentary rocks. That resistance creates the crags and scarps you see in every iconic shot. the wall riding a dark ridge, with the land falling away beneath it. Here's the twist. The Romans used the windsill as a ready-made defensive spine, but they didn't usually build the wall out of it. Dolerite is brutally hard to shape, so they often quarried local carboniferous sandstones for the masonry while letting the sill provide the natural high ground. This is why places like Housestead's Roman fort, known to the Romans as Vercovicium, feel perfectly positioned rather than randomly placed. English Heritage describes it as Britain's most complete Roman fort, standing on the dramatic Windsill escarpment, flanked by surviving stretches of the wall. You can stand in the fort and read the logic: visibility, control, and a skyline built to intimidate. And the wall wasn't manned by ghosts. One of the most human windows into frontier life sits just south of the wall at Vindolanda, where thin wooden writing tablets survived in the wet ground. The British Museum holds a famous one, a birthday invitation from Claudia Severa to Sulpicia Lepidina, found at Vindolanda. Not propaganda, not official history, just ordinary life persisting in the shadow of empire. The ecology around the wall reinforces its mood. Much of this country is open upland and moor, where plants like heather dominate and the wind has room to run. In Northumberland's wider moorland habitats, birds like the curlew breed on the wet edges, voices you'll hear before you see them. And as the wall drops toward the west, the land opens into the tidal world of the Solway Firth, with mudflats and salt marsh that host wintering and migrating birds, waders like the oyster catcher, and flocks, including barnacle geese, in season. To experience Hadrian's Wall in Eritreal style, treat it as a coast-to-coast idea, then pick one central section where the geology does the cinematography for you. Start at Wallsend, Rome's eastern bookend, and feel the wall as a statement that begins in a real city and runs out into emptiness. Move to the central crags around Housesteads and the Windsill Ridge country, where the wall becomes a living contour line on hard volcanic rock. End at Bowness on Solway, where the wall dissolves into tide, horizon, and the broad breathing space of the Solway Firth. For grounding, if you're walking it, the Hadrian's Wall path is 84 miles, 135 kilometers coast to coast, from Wallsend to Bowness on Solway, and it's long enough that weather, daylight, and fatigue become part of the story. Plan like it's real terrain, because it is, and this is why Hadrian's Wall matters as our final destination. This whole documentary has been England as layers, belief written into chalk at Stonehenge and Avebury, deep time exposed on the Jurassic Coast, heat rising into civilization at Bath, rock turning into modernity at Ironbridge, and mountains carved by ice in the Lake District. Hadrian's Wall ties all of it into one closing image, a nation's northern edge, defined by geology, engineered by empire, and still readable in the land. From the Thames in London, where power learned to speak in stone and tide, we followed England as a layered story, one that gets older the further you travel. We stepped into Canterbury, where belief became a road you could walk. We crossed the chalk downs to Stonehenge and Avebury, where prehistory still holds its ground in open air. We traced deep time along the Jurassic Coast, where cliffs turn into a readable archive and the sea keeps editing the page. We entered Bath, where heat rises from the earth and a city formed around water that refuses to cool. We climbed into Ironbridge Gorge, where coal and iron helped ignite a new world. We felt the land harden in the Peak District, split between limestone dales and gritstone edges. We escalated into the Lake District, where glaciers carved valleys and water kept the shape of the ice. And we ended at Hadrian's Wall, a frontier laid across the island like a final sentence. That's what England does when you follow it as a trail. It doesn't give you one identity. It gives you layers, natural forces first, then human choices, then the long echo, where both become inseparable. If you enjoyed this journey, take a second to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It genuinely helps Era Trails grow, and it keeps you with us for the stories ahead. Thanks for traveling with us. Until the next trail.